And the red light's on, the camera's on, we're recording. Okay, today's Wednesday the 7th. We'll see how long it takes to get this one posted, probably tomorrow. I'm glad I'm not responsible for posting. That way I don't get as much trouble. Okay, the quote is on the board behind me, and there's a video to watch that goes with the quote. 2 cellos. Have fun with it, but watch it. The fact there is a highway to hell and a stairway to heaven says a lot about anticipated traffic numbers. And there's a smiley there. It's meant to be funny. Whoops. Okay. Once you have your notes turned in and those questions, you are finished with chapter 5, and we're going to start entry into Boethius, chapter 6, page 125 in your text. It's an interesting guy, and he's also did most of his writing like another biblical person, Paul, from prison. In the text, and unless you really dig, it doesn't tell you really why he was in prison. But again, he's one of those people that were outspoken, but he did primarily most of his work through his writings of the Constellation of Philosophies, and Lady Philosophy is within that text. So, we're going to start with like always, with some information about Boethius. He was also a late Roman and early medieval writer. His dates are, we're not quite sure which year he passed away, but it's 480 to 525 AD. Not too long. He came around 50 years after Augustine, and again to carry on the great conversation of things that he heard and things that he was aware of and things that he was worried about. Again, the known civilization that was the dominant one at the time was falling. That was Rome. It was collapsing and losing power. And the Byzantine Empire would be the next one in the medieval age that would be actually the one that becomes in power next. But the transition is slow. Okay, with this in mind and all the things that were going on in his world, your text makes reference to how his family was sick, he was sick, things were kind of just falling apart. So he tried to take positive notes in life and in the world around him. Now, he's given credit in this philosophy for his writings that was the bedrock for future ideas of representative government, international laws. Notice the word international laws, not local laws. The idea of advancing the scientific revolution. Kind of those 3 things. His actual writings of the philosophy, confessions they're not really confessions, but they're again a conflict of his struggles in life. Now, his major book is called The Constellation of Philosophy, and it gives ideas of all human suffering. And now, he did a lot of his writing through second person, used poetry, prose, cantor writing, but second person narrative. And this is where within the Constellation of Philosophy comes the words, and actually a little brief insert in your textbook on Lady Philosophy. He chose a lady to represent his second referring to a lot of things like she and her, just for your information. Um, some of his beliefs, he considered life as a timeless, ongoing, eternal thing. Um, with that in mind, he definitely thought through divine perspective. Uh, and I'm sure he got that from Augustine's writings that we just finished. He wasn't a student of Augustine, but he must have studied him and many other. That's why we have the great conversation as a terminology of past philosophers and others as they come along, adapting or adopting some of what they said and add their thing to it. He states that nothing is ever lost because all things are possessed by God. Boethius was a Christian, but he did not understand all the Christian principles, but he understood enough that you can tell that he, as you'll see in the philosophy discussion, how important goodness is. Now, what he was also trying to do in his writings, the Greek and the Roman empires, with the Roman crumbling at his lifetime, and the Greek already had crumbled out of power, and the next power at the time is in the Byzantine Empire. He thought it was important that you took the best of the Greek and the Romans, combine them, and I got a hint this is how he got the word the constellation of philosophies, of two different styles, two different countries. Well, they were not really countries, they were world powers. Combine their thoughts and ideas and take the best out of that, and you will have a new philosophy, a new way to look at things with some of the old mixed in. Now, when he actually gets down to writing, this Constellation of Philosophy was a very sought after book or pamphlet, whatever they called them, or text. They had different names for the writings, but as you know, writing a book or a text is a long process. And it doesn't go into detail if he did the actual writing. I was just double checking, make sure my sound is still working. I'm hoping the video is still working. That's where we had troubles last time we recorded. Are we okay back there? All right, good. He does almost all of his writing and thinking of what life should be like and trying to figure things out from prison cell. Just like Paul, he doesn't send certain letters out, but he sends this book or text out as something for all to take into consideration. Again, in second person narrative, even when he writes that way. He would even speak that way, and there would be a lot of times not in your text, but in other texts that I've read about him, you will see that he actually argues with himself. He actually talks to himself in a second person narrative. You know, I've done that. I think you guys sitting here are probably, why did I say that, or why did I do that? Or you're thinking it, and sometimes it just comes out, especially if you're alone, and people don't think you're too crazy. At least yourself, anyway. again, as I said earlier, he uses the narrative of a lady, and that's where the word lady philosophy came in. And there's a couple things I want to read to you. On page 126, just at the bottom of 125, Boethius is call it a little book, Constellation of Philosophy. This is what they call it in your text. He never stopped selling since he wrote it. Okay, and again, did he really write it, or did he have someone in prison write it with him, or whatever? Okay, the pleasant songs, my works. I'm just going to start out reading some of the philosophy. And see if you can kind of get into it a little bit. The bright were all my labors then, now in the tears to sad refrains I am compelled to turn. In other words, he's trying to tell you a story that he's not doing too well, things are not going well in society, and with his family, and with himself, and he's struggling. And a lot of times when a person struggles, you ask yourself questions, or you ask others questions, and you're trying to figure out what I need to do to set this right. There were the pride of my early bright-lived days and my later gloomy days that are the comfort of my fate. By unhappiness has age come upon me without warning, a grief have set within me in my old age and gloom. White hairs have scattered untimely on my head, and the skin hangs loosely from my worn-out limbs. So here you go. Mine is starting to hang loosely. If you guys observe your grandparents, in their later years, you see those symbols, and of course, the obvious one we see is the white hair first. But anyway, he's trying to give you a picture of time. In the early days, things seemed to be pretty good. Pleasures and happiness came through pleasures and personal gain. He had not yet, in the early years of his, they call them muses. I don't know if you've heard of that term before, M-U-S-E-S. They can be bad and they can be good, but his early muses brought him, and then now that he's lived through what's happened in the fall of Rome and his country and his family and things crumbling, just like the Roman Empire is crumbling. So this is what he was trying to point out to you. On page 129, there's a little thing I want to read there. Philosophy in those chambers I had spent my life from earliest manhood. And I asked her, now, again, you're going to see before you see the Lady Philosophy edition, I asked her, I don't know what you name your little person you talk to, the thing or whatever, but his was a lady. Philosophy in the chambers I spent my life from earliest man. And I asked her, wherefore have you, mistress of all virtues, come down from heaven above to visit my lonely place of banishment? He's in prison, and he's saying, why have you come down, or why am I talking to you, or, it's a discussion. It is that you as well as I may be heard or known, the victim of false charges. How did I get into this, in other words, situation? Should I, she said, desert you, my nursling? Now, he's thinking back to what she would be saying. Like, that's his mom, and she's taking care of him. Should I not share and bear my part of my burden, which has laid upon you from spite against my name? Surely, philosophy never allowed herself to let the innocent go upon their journey unbefriended. So he's found his identification to keep his sanity, so to speak, by creating this lady philosophy that he can question and answer and keep moving while he's in prison. All right, now we move a little bit further. If I can find it, 139. Okay, I'm actually on 138. There's the insert I want to read first. When a man sows in virgin soil, first he clears away the brushes and cuts the brambles and the ferns, and the corn goddess may go forth laden with her new fruit. You know, you clear the land to produce fruit and plant things. The honey that the bee has toiled to give us is sweeter when the mouth has tasted bitter things. The stars shine with more pleasing grace when a storm has ceased to roar and pour down rain. After the morning star has dispersed the shade of the nights. Okay, do you guys know what the morning star represents through history? The morning star is the first light of the day, and the first light of the day was with yesterday's quote, "The light that shines upon you is God." And historically, back then, that's what the morning star, the first light of the day, but it is a representation of God. When the first morning star has dispersed shades of night, the day in all of its beauty drives its rosy chariot forth. Thou hast looked upon false happiness first, and now I draw my neck from under her yoke, so she shall true happiness now come to my soul. There's a lot said in that last little bit there of he understands that God is the light, and that's what's going to make a big, big difference. Now, over on page 139, I even have this. Read to the class, Larry. Okay. More than all measures of fruit of good by pleasure and enjoyment, these things are this, I think, are the happiest man he must abandon to be pleasurable. Further, there are those who confuse the aims and causes of good things as those who desire riches for the sake of power or of pleasure, or those who seek power for the sake of money and celebrity. In these, then, the other things like to them lies in the aim of man's actions and prayers. It all relies upon your prayers and what your actions are. Okay, are you into being renowned and popular, which seems to afford some fame, or wife and children, which are sought for the pleasure they give? On the other hand, the good of friends, which is the most honorable and the holy of all, lies not in fortune, but in the virtue's realm. Virtue's realm. All others are adopted for the sake of power or enjoyment. True meaning in happiness comes through your actions, but who surrounds you? Your family. Now, the reference sometimes when you say family, you think immediately your children, your wife, all your relatives. But family is those in the virtues realm of. I want to use the word Christian, and he doesn't use it here, but who you surround yourself with, your clique, the group. Like, let's say for this college, all the students here are probably in your realm of not only having something to go for here, but even though they may not be your closest friends, but they are your family friends, and they are very important for your soul and for your happiness. And that's how I look at you guys, and as a teacher or professor here. And it brings me much pleasure and happiness. Okay, and I want to read the last little bit of that. Again, it is plain that the good things of the body must be accounted to those false causes that I have already mentioned. Okay, move on down. By all these happinesses alone is plainly desire. Each man holds that to the highest good, which he seeks before all others, but to find the highest good to be happiness. Okay, now the question will come in its consolation, how do I reach that highest good? That's what's going to happen here after a while. Not today, but tomorrow or Friday. Whomever, which each man desires above all things, he holds always to be the state of happiness. Wherefore you have each placed before you a form of human happiness. There's a difference. Wealth, honors, power, glory, and pleasure. Consider these forms alone, according to and determined upon pleasure of the highest good, because all others seemed but to join with it in bringing enjoyment to the mind. The enjoyment to the mind is, as you're going to find out, Lady Philosophy and Consolation of Philosophy has a battle. And the battle is, how do we seek and find? And and I want to, we're going to go through that on Friday. I have a couple more things and we'll be done. Here's a key point. Consolation of Philosophy says what we want to hear. Think about that. Lady Philosophy says what is needed straight out without compromise. Tells it like it is. So the struggle of the two that he's created in his writings. He knows this is the worldly pleasure, but he knows this is the way it should go. Again, Consolation of Philosophy says what we want to hear. And I know out there in the world we often do or want to hear things a certain way, and we don't like when someone tells us the truth or points out that this is not the way. Lady Philosophy says what is needed without compromise. You cannot continue, in other words, on your journey like this. You need to go back to what happiness, in this case, how it got there, how you will get there. It's like arguing back and forth. And that's where we'll stop for today, because as we get to the two conflicts, the overall question then is, how can we find happiness? It was a roundabout way getting there, but setting the stage of his background and his entry into the Consolation of Philosophy and why he wrote it and how he wrote it, and then the conflict between the two in reference to Lady Philosophy. And as you see in your textbook, Lady Philosophy starts on, and it's only a couple pages of information about it there for you on page 141. But the big question is, how can we find happiness? And actually, you could even say, how do you define happiness for yourself? Everyone has a philosophy, but they could be alike. But they cannot be perfectly the same. Every individual is created by God and has individual abilities, but we have one common goal, and that is to seek God and to eventually, as we talked about with the ending of Augustine, how to get there. So, okay, that's it for today. We'll continue with Boethius on Friday and the conflict between the two philosophies. Meanwhile, make sure to You look at the quote, write it down, and then look at the short video song, The Two Cellos, Highway to Hell. You'll enjoy it. Okay, thank you.